Lauren and welcome back to my channel. This is Light in Lavender where we talk about all things books and my own writing journey, and today I'm doing my December wrap up. In December I actually managed to read a crazy amount of books. I don't know where I got the motivation from or the energy, but I finished 12 books in December. What? I don't know how I got to 12. I have no idea where 12 books came from. I don't know how I got there. I think maybe 3 or 4 of them I started before December, but that's still an impressive amount of books that I've managed to finish in this month. And it was a pretty good reading month. Overall I got an average of about 3.98 stars per book, which I'm gonna take. I had a pretty good reading month. I know that there were some books that were a bit not really interested in, and a couple of really great books that I really enjoyed and would really recommend to everyone as well. The first book that I finished in December was These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. I got this book in a Paralit subscription and I also received the book on NetGalley as an ARC. Clearly I didn't finish reading it in time for the book to actually come out, but I did really enjoy this book. I gave it 4.5 stars overall. This is a Romeo and Juliet retelling. I would say less of a retelling and more of like, it is very similar. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not sure what the word is. So it's less inspired by more an actual full-on retelling of Romeo and Juliet. The entire storyline is set in 1920s Shanghai, and the main protagonists are Roma Montagov of the White Flower Gang and Juliet Kai of the Scarlet Gang, which are the 2 rival gangs in Shanghai vying for power against the foreign diplomat, traders, invaders of Britain, France and the rest of the world who are trying to come into China and take over. There's also a subplot of Communist Party rise in China as well, but the main issue is that a madness is sweeping through the city and Roma and Juliet are thrust together and have to work to try and find out what is actually causing harm to their city. I really enjoyed this book. I did think it was a little bit slow to get into, so the first couple of chapters I think they were too heavily inspired by Romeo and Juliet, and I was constantly trying to pick out the bits that I could remember, and I think that kind of caused me to lose my way a little bit. But once it got into the main storyline of this book, using the backdrop of Romeo and Juliet, I thought it was really good. I don't think I've read many books inspired or set in China, to be honest, so I was really excited to get through this one. I really loved it. I thought it was wonderful. I loved the element of the madness. I loved the fantastical elements mixed in with the reality of the situation. I think there was quite a lot of research done in this for the history side of things, and then the acknowledgements. Chloe has said that she spent a lot of time talking to family members to try and get the information that she needed, and she did do quite a lot of research, which is something that I love. I love the fact that she tried to get this as historically accurate as she could, whilst also keeping the integrity of her own creative license. This sort of historical accuracy is what has made this book so wonderful, because it's made the world building of this just beyond amazing. I don't know how she was able to write it, to be honest, but I felt so immersed. I could picture all the streets that they were walking down. When things were mentioned later on in the plot, you could pick up on where they were in relation to where things had happened previously, and I think it's just one of the great things about this book, along with just everything else. There were so many twists in this book. Oh my god, so many twists, not just with the entire sort of Romeo and Juliet style twist, but just I loved it. I was trying to pick up on certain aspects of the plot throughout, and there were some people I was like, they're definitely shady. They're hella shady people, but I couldn't quite figure out where the shadiness ended, and the twists for it. I absolutely loved it. The ending is wonderful. It was just perfectly executed. That's the only way I can describe it. So obviously this is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, so the romance is very strong within here, but I also feel like there was an element of enemies to lovers, kind of. It's not really enemies to lovers, but there was definitely sort of like a hate to love kind of relationship building in here. There was a lot of issues between Roma and Juliet from their childhood and the way that they had grown up as people, and I think that that sort of like hate to love element was really interesting. It was a new dynamic and a new twist for the Romeo and Juliet retelling, and I think it helped to give this book the sort of edge they needed to be potentially one of the best Romeo and Juliet retellings that I have ever come across. I think my main issue with this book is actually that it's not a standalone. I really thought this was a standalone book, but right at the end there's a bit that's like, wait for book 2, and I'm like, no, I need to know what happens now. So that is pretty much my main bugbear for this book, that I didn't get the full story and I just wanted to keep reading and I wanted to keep going. So I will definitely be picking up the next book when it comes out, and I am so excited to read it, and I hope that it is as wonderful as this book. The second book I read in the month was Midnight Wings by Ariel Sealing. I got this from Book Sirens to do a review on. I give this 3.5 stars. This is a Cinderella retelling set on a spaceship, which honestly had me gripped. I wanted to know more. It sounded really intriguing. I loved it. I loved the idea. Cinderella in space. Oh my god. But I feel like it fell really short. This is the first novella in a series of novellas on fairy tale retelling set on this spaceship that is travelling through the space. But I feel like it relied too heavily on Cinderella and didn't give itself enough chance to develop its own characters. Everything seemed really stilted and jumpy and there's no words to describe that really. Just kind of jumping around from point to point, and I just feel like it could have been done a little bit better if there'd been a few thousand words extra being allowed to this story. We follow the main character Elle, who is an orphan. She wants to be a fighter pilot in the intergalactic fleet, but unfortunately her stepmother and her stepsisters have trashed her social rating ranking, which is kind of like, imagine like a game leaderboard thing, and she's been like put as a social pariah. No one wants to be a friend because it'll drag them down. I thought that was a really interesting concept, but I don't think they gave it enough time to develop. It was mentioned a lot throughout the story, but not really explained fully. I'm not entirely sure still how her rating could be trashed so badly and how she could have been sabotaged, but she was, and that was one of the reasons that stopped her from being able to pursue this dream until an announcement is made where there is a tournament being held by the royal family to give everybody in the city the chance to become a fighter pilot. So they have to enter this competition, a tournament thing, where they do a simulation of a flight test based on a game that everyone plays, and Elle obviously isn't allowed to go. She's forbidden by her stepmother, and obviously she finds a way to get to the tournament, as with Cinderella, and I don't know, it was just, it went from the beginning to the end so fast. I think I read this book in maybe an hour and a half? An hour and a half might be too generous, but I read it really quick. I just feel like there was a lot missing. Elle also is introduced to the Prince Charming figure quite a lot earlier in this book, and that element's not really developed much. It's sort of like, chance encounter, encounter here, it's just, it's very jittery, and I don't know, I kind of enjoyed the story and I loved the idea behind it, but I think it just needed a little bit more to it. The third book that I read this month was Percy Jackson and the Battle of the Labyrinth. I gave this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I loved the introduction of Daedalus and exploring the labyrinth that was in this story. I don't think it was the best in the series, which is potentially a really big unpopular opinion for people who enjoy the Percy Jackson books, but I don't know, there was just something about it that meant that it wasn't my personal favourite. I do think it's a good book. I think it's a lot better than Sea of Monsters, for instance. It's not the worst book in the series, but there was just a lot happening that I thought maybe was dragged out a little bit too long. I did love the labyrinth and I loved Daedalus's story. I loved the way Nico's story went, but I don't want to get into it too much because I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I will leave a link in the description down below to the reading vlog that I did for all of the Percy Jackson books, so you can get my thoughts for that there. The fourth book that I read in December was Kleptopia, How Dirty Money is Conquering the World by Tom Burgess. I actually listened to this as an audiobook, but we also bought the physical copy. This is Todd's book. He is really into his non-fiction, and honestly this was a really interesting book. I give this 4 stars. So if you've ever heard of like the money laundering and tax havens around the world, this goes into it in a lot more detail. It explains how kleptopia and kleptocracy has spread through the world, how it is affecting pretty much every country in the world, and how the global how the global kleptocracy is actually controlling the world as we know it, and how pretty much democracy in a way is a fraud. I think it was a really interesting read. It was done by Tom Burgess, who is an investigative journalist. I'm saying so many words that I cannot pronounce, and I think that this was a really well documented and well researched piece of work. It is quite a hefty book. I think it was 10 hours on audio, which isn't too long, but it's also quite a long book. If you've ever been interested in learning more about tax havens or how people are able to hide dirty money, then I would definitely recommend this book. I think it was a great eye-opener and a great beginning to try and look into that world. Although, because it's done on research of real people, there's some aspects of it that still made me like, oh no, because it goes into their lives a little bit, and I did really enjoy that aspect as well. I liked the sort of grounding down with certain families and certain people of how they got this information. The fifth book that I read in December was Christmas with Billy and Me. This was a really short, tiny book, which was great after reading Kleptopia. I liked this book. I think I gave it 3.5 stars, so it wasn't bad. I just feel like it was very short, there wasn't a lot of time to get into it. It was again a bit jolty and jittery. I wouldn't read this if you've not read Billy and Me because it does give away some spoilers, so I won't go into it too much. But I don't know. I feel like I understand why it came out, a lovely little Christmas companion novel to go with Billy and Me, but there wasn't really much in it, and yeah, it was a good read, but nothing to sort of sing home about. The sixth book that I finished in December was Percy Jackson and the Last Olympian. I give this 5 stars, my only 5-star read of the month. I think this is the best in the series. This is my favourite book out of the entire series. Again, I don't want to go into spoilers too much because it is the final book in a series, but I loved the culmination of the series in this. I loved the way that the characters had progressed to these points in this book. I love the way that Percy has progressed as a person. I love how everything was like pulled together and how it was all sort of weaved and threaded, and I love the parallels. Again, in the description below is my reading vlog for this, where I go into it a little bit more, but honestly it was my favourite book. The only thing that annoys me with this book is that it doesn't match my other covers. So I need to get the 4th book, but this does not match the covers that I've got. It's very similar but slightly different. The other ones I've got are more gloss, but this is a more matte cover, and it really bugs me. The 7th book that I finished in December was The Young Elites by Marie Lu. I gave this one 4 stars. I listened to this on my library app. I really enjoyed the book. I liked the premise of a blood fever ravaging the land and leaving young children scarred and marked and classed as malfetos. And although I'm gonna say this now because it's based on Italian language and they keep saying malfetos, but it would be malfetti, and that's just a little language nerd issue that I've got, but I digress. I liked how some of the malfetos had certain powers or certain abilities, and this was explored through fear and hate, and our main character Adelina Amutero she was a very dark person. I liked that. I liked that the main character for this book was a very dark and troubled person, and I liked the way her story progressed. I enjoyed the book so much. I'm going to be looking for I think it's called the Rose Society, the next in the series. And I'll be looking for that so I can listen to that on my library app as well, because I want to see how this story progresses. I think it's interesting. I feel like it's got a lot of links to sort of like religious persecution and like the witch hunts because they were burning people at stakes. But yeah, really interesting book, and I would recommend it. It's a couple of years old, but what am I if not someone who reads the backlists? The 8th book that I finished in December was Dream a Little Christmas Dream by Giovanna Fletcher. I gave this one 3 stars. Although this one is slightly longer than the other Christmas companion novel, I disliked this one more, and I think that is to do with the way the main character was exploited. I think it's not really exploited, but that's the idea. Again, I wouldn't read this if you've not read Dream a Little Dream because otherwise there are massive spoilers. But this character thought that her other half was going to break up with her, and she's constantly led to believe that she's ignoring things, she's making things up, and I didn't like that sort of, oh, you must be wrong, or that element. I don't know, there was just something about it that I really didn't like, and although I thought the ending was really cute, I just really disliked the entire idea of that. I don't think lying to your other half is a great thing, and I don't think it's a really good thing to be promoting, because I know it's not really promoting it, but it's like, I don't know. I don't know if I was just in the wrong headspace to read it, but I didn't really like this book. The 9th book that I finished in December was The Smoke Thieves by Sally Green. Again, this was on my library, so I don't have a physical copy of the book. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I thought it was quite interesting. I'm not sure if I'm going to carry on the series of this one, but I did enjoy the different characters. I liked how they came from different walks of lives. We've got a thief, a hunter, a princess, a bastard prince heir to a throne thing. I don't know. It was just really interesting. I liked the way that betrayal came up a lot. I liked the implications of traitorism. There was a crazy, power-rich king who wanted to conquer the world pretty much, and yeah, I kind of liked the overall premise, but I feel like some things weren't gone into as much as possible. But I think this is because this book, although it is a fantasy, it was written not to be a standalone. It was written as the start of a series, so I think a lot of the information will be explained further on, but I'm not sure if I enjoyed it enough to pick up the other books in the series. We'll see how well I do with reading all the books that I actually own. Despite my own reservations with this book, I do think it is a really good book if you are wanting to get into fantasy. It's a really easy read, it's quite light, it's not got a lot of heavy sort of fantasy elements to it. It's a light brushing of fantasy. We're set in a medieval world and there's demons, and their life essence, the demon smoke, is used as a form of narcotic drug thing. Not narcotic, pretty much you can get high off the demon smoke. I can't remember what the word is, but it does have these sort of like light fantasy elements, so if you do want to get into fantasy, I think this is a really good book to start with. The 10th book that I finished in December was Wild Magic by Tamora Pierce. I gave this one 4 stars. I think this is a slightly better fantasy than The Smoke Thieves, but I think this is more because there is like a magic element to it, and I love me some magic. I'm not going to turn down a magic book. I liked the concept of fantastical creatures and a immortal realm that creatures have been locked into, and I liked the sort of battle element to it and the warfare that was going off, although it was very light because this is a young adult book. Well, I say young adult, it was written in 1992, so I think it's more like just a kid's book, but I really thought that it encapsulated the idea well. I really enjoyed the main character Dane. I thought she was an interesting character. She was a little bit damaged as potentially the other way to describe it, but I don't think that stopped her. She was always looking out for people, she wanted the best in people, she wanted the best for people, she's always trying to do what she could to help, and I really enjoyed it, so I will be picking up the others in the series when I get the chance to. The 11th book that I read in December was Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. This is one of my favourite books. I gave it 4.5 stars. It's not the best in the Discworld, but I just love Terry Pratchett's writing style. I dislike the fact that there's no chapters in his books, but it's just something that I'll have to live with. I liked the premise. I liked how this was the Discworld's take on Christmas, and also how the lack of belief can cause issues. This is one of the books featuring Death as a main character, who is my absolute favourite character. Maybe around the same as the witches. I love the witches. Death is pretending to be Hogfather because something has gone awry and he has disappeared. He enlists the help of his granddaughter Susan, unbeknownst to her that he's enlisting her, to try and help figure out how to get the Hogfather back. That is the story in a nutshell. I really loved it. I love the entire concept of this book. I liked how the Hogfather's like origin story is created in this. There are some nods to other series within the Discworld, so although it doesn't, I don't think it spoils the enjoyment, it just it makes it difficult to understand where some of the information is coming from, so maybe it's not the best book to start with, but I do think it's a good book and everyone should read it. If you want to see my full thoughts, I have done a spoilery reading vlog which I'll leave in the description down below. You should definitely go and read this one. And the last book that I read in December was The Thousand Deaths of Ardor Benn by Tyler Whiteside. I finally finished it. I started it in October and it took me, I think it was 71 days on Storygraph. 71 days to finish the book. I don't think I read it pretty much at all in November / most of December. I read it in the last couple of days of December. Well, I finished it. Oh my god. That was a long book. That was a wild ride of a book. Ardor Benn is what is known as a ruse artist, so he does a lot of crimes involved. He's like pretty much a con man, but he creates elaborate stories to be able to pull off the ruse. And he is employed by a religious figure within the church type thing on this world to try and steal the king's dragon scale suit. And they need this as there is an issue with the dragons and the world, and the religious guy thinks that he'll be able to solve it with this, and it is a really good book. I gave it 3.75 stars. I had originally given it 4.5, but I think there were a couple of issues with some characters, so I knocked it down to 3.75 because I still think it's a really enjoyable book and that everyone should read it. So it's set in a fantastical world where pretty much the majority of the world lives on the islands known as the Great Chains, and there is an island called Peckle that has dragons on it, and the world thrives on this substance called grit, which is pretty much powdered dragon poo. They call it slagstone, but I'm going to call it what it is, it's dragon poo. With grit they can create light, they can create heat, they can create barriers, blasting equipment. It's all everything pretty much technological in our world is done via grit, and I did like that element to it, but there is a nefarious sort of subplot obviously, and there's a heist element which I really enjoyed. I think I enjoyed the first half of the book more than the second half because that had the entire ruse aspects to it, so preparing and getting into it and the actual heist, and I really loved that. I loved the world building in that. And then we get onto the second half where it's about sort of finalising the plans and what to do once they've got the shell, and although I enjoyed it, I didn't enjoy it as much as the first half, so there is that. It's a little bit annoying. I feel like the ending fell a little bit flat, but I read this as a standalone, and surprise surprise, it's not standalone, there's a sequel. So although it fell flat, I think it fell flat to give you the drive to read the second book, but for me that was just a little bit annoying. But I did enjoy it and I would recommend it to people. I think it's a good fantasy book. It is long though. There is around, I think it's 750-ish pages, so it is a long book. So if you're going to read it, you're going to need some time to sit and read it, and I think leaving a few weeks between the first half and the second half was an issue, and I shouldn't have done that. I should have tried to read it more in one consistent flow. Those were the 12 books that I managed to get through in December. I'm still in shock. It meant that for the entirety of 2020 I read 44 books. I don't know how I managed to finish 12 books in a month. I'm still trying to get over it. I am going to try and read a little less each month from now, but hopefully it means that I've given myself the push to actually achieve my reading goal for next year. Let me know what books you read in December, and maybe I'll try and read some of your books in the future. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a like, and also don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. There's a new video out every single week. I hope you're all well and you're all staying safe, and until next time, bye!